Hello. I think I'm live. Well, it's difficult to tell. There's so many strange connections between me and the interweb at the moment. My glasses are slightly askew. Look at that. So I'll sort that out. I got caught on the old headphones there. That's better. So at the moment I've got some models in front of me, which are these Battletech models, and I'm doing some bases on them. As you can see, the base themselves has a sort of empty space around there, which I need to fill up and texture in one way or another. And I have a selection of them here in front of me that I'm going to do that on. I've cleaned up the little hex base itself, and the models have been cleaned up as well and glued together. So the next stage in the production of these is to get some green stuff and texture and details into there. So I'm going to do that now. Look, my glasses are still askew somewhat. I don't think I'm going to repair that situation. And I'm going to zoom down onto these in a moment so you can see them as I work on them here in isolation. So let's do that. Oh hey. So as you can see before me, I have a cutter, which is a guillotine style. Perfect for removing heads of senior politicians that are no longer required, or unfortunately just fingers. You don't want me to see this blood and gore in action. But I use that guillotine to cut up some of this small styrene rod, which I will then use on the base as well. Old metal Raupatha, yes Sean, they are old Raupatha models, which I've got 4 of here. They came out of this box set, which is an old Battletech Lance box set. I'm going to move it through here, transitional, and you can see them there. So it's an assault lance, which comes in there with a warhammer, a battlemaster, a marauder, and a second warhammer. And it's an old set that I've had for years, which I recently glued together and cleaned up in a previous video, and now I thought I'd better do the basing. And to do that I use green stuff, which is in my little box here, which is a 2-part epoxy putty, and comes in little strips which you then cut a little piece off and then blend them together using your fingers. So I shall do that because I'm going to start to fill those up. Well, actually I'll do that in a moment because I need to decide what I'm going to do with this styrene rod to start with. And this is made by Slater's, which is a model railroad fine scale railway components. So they do this assorted microstrip pack. I've had this for years. In fact, it's yellowing slightly, I think, because I've had it for so long. There's a bottom is yellowing. But yeah, it's handy for just little tiny chips and things to look like masonry on the bottom of the bases. So obviously you can use just a normal scalpel to cut this stuff up, or you can use one of these if you were trying to do a very specific setup. This is from a company called RP Tools. They're Polish, and yeah, so they do lots of little fine cutting tool sets for this kind of thing. I shall zoom in, try and get that into focus. I think that's pretty sharp. So yeah, all I'm going to do with this is just take some of these little styrene strips and then just cut them up on the guillotine. And yeah, you can sort of adjust this on this tool, so it's got a lot of different variances in terms of being able to cut the strip at different angles. And I've used that for doing various bits and pieces in the past, but in this instance I just want some reasonably similarly length pieces of this styrene rod, and which is convenient for putting on the bases as extra detailing when I get to that point. So this is hours of fun watching me cut styrene rod up, but you know, it's a good use of the tool. So demonstration wise, you can see you get very even length. So if you were trying to build some little structures from styrene rod that were all evenly sized, it's a convenient tool for that. And over the years I've bought various things from RP Tools. They do a variety of fine scale modelling gear. Yeah, and just for the purposes of viewing this, actually one thing I might do is I'll put those in a little pot or something. So if I dig about for a pot. Yes, a little glass jar. It just makes it easier to track where these things are because they're so small. But yeah, in terms of the tool, as you can see, just has a razor blade on there, so don't get your finger stuck in there. And let's go back down and I'll just do some different bits of rod this time. That's quite a tiny skinny piece, but there's a larger section there which I shall cut as well. Make these pieces slightly longer. Just get my models back out of the way as well. Couple of longer pieces, couple of smaller slices too. Yeah, whenever I get this tool out, because of that razor blade on the guillotine there, I have like a momentary fear of loss of limb, which I'm sure we've all had at some point. In fact, I think I'd only owned this guillotine about a week, and I picked it up by this handle, not thinking, of course, that the blade is one little step further along there. So that was not fun, but I'd obviously managed to avoid any injury. And with things on lockdown at the moment as they are, it's obviously you don't want to like a half severed finger to have to deal with in the emergency services. So yeah, that's that one. I'll probably just get a couple more sections off here. You can see this is the assaulted styrene pack, and just having a dig through to get a few different sizes so that when I put them on the base, after the base has been put together, it just looks uneven, like there's some broken masonry in bits and pieces. This is probably not since the French Revolution has such live use of a guillotine been made. So yeah, there's a build-up of little pieces. And now I just want some very thin rod as well to be able to put on there. I'm just looking, see some little square rod. Can you lock the blade in the down position? No, actually you can't. It's just free. It's just free. Unless there's something, let's get the last bits of styrene rod off the side. Unless there's something that you can tighten on here maybe. I seem to remember maybe there was something that you could put over the bottom of it. But essentially when that's down like that, that's its safety position. I was just foolish when I first got it that I just sort of went to grab it off the desk and I used the guillotine arm to pick it up instead of the side. There is a screw port there to permanently put it on a desk, which would be safer, I think. So here's some very skinny rod, which I'm going to cut. The other thing these guys do at RP Tools is they do some nice die stamps as well for making different shapes. I think I've got those. Yeah, I've got them over here. And you know, while I'm just doing a little bit of video, why not show those off too? But yeah, these are their die stamp kits, and basically you can make some rods with their die punch, or you can make some, so they're circular discs, and there's one in here which I particularly like. which makes little hex shapes. And you can see on there that they're pretty nice looking. And I shall demonstrate those after I've just done a little bit more of this to avoid any injuries. So that's as many of these little bits of styrene cuts that I'm going to use on the bases, so I shall safely put this out of the way. I don't think there's anywhere safe for it. So yeah, the hole punches that they do, again, you use the same very skinny styrene sheet in them, and the kit themselves is a metal base plate, and when you unscrew them, it gives you a space underneath to slide the styrene rod or sheet. So you can see there now I've pushed that through the perspex or acrylic plate, and then you can line it up with the die holes inside, which gives you some very nice little fine shapes to use. And then you just match up the die stamp to the size. So if I go for the 125, because it was convenient, I just found that one. It's a bit fussy in that, you know, one at a time, you've got to do one stamp. So that's the 125 hex in there, and then so you make sure it's nice and firmly down, and then you give it a good old whack. And that should have pushed it out at the bottom, which you can see. I probably needed to hit that a bit harder because I can see the edges are not as sharp as they could be. So if I zoom into that so you can see it. There it is, the tiniest of small hexes. Maybe if I do a couple more and see if I can make them a bit sharper. But there you can see I've left the hole behind it too. Slide the sheet along and give it another whack. This time I'm going to give it a really good firm solid strike. And then do a few more, because I will put these on the base as well as extra detailing. There's still a nice sharp edge on there, so it should be doing a good job. Of course, normally I would do a stack of these beforehand, and then it avoids me, while I'm streaming, spending a huge amount of time just punching small shapes out. I'm fine, thanks, Andy. How are you doing? How's Texas today? Is it sunny? Or is it Houston? I can't remember which city you live near. Although then again, Texas is the state, Houston is the city. This is it. I'm going to do just like one more now. One more little hex to go on the base for the detailing. That wasn't very firm. That wasn't a very firm strike, but never mind. So there we go. We've got lots of the little shapes building up in there. You can see them there. That one looks near perfect in every way. Some of the others look a bit rough. Maybe I didn't fit it in as firmly as I could have done. So I should get that strip of rod out. You can see actually I've done this before, and I've left a rod with a lot of punches out of it when I've done that before. In fact, that if those punched out sections of styrene, the reason I kept them was because that could be used for detailing on some other bit of modelling I'm doing as well. So that's the styrene rod sorted, and a quick use of that punch, which I just enjoy doing anyway generally. And now the impossible task, because they're slightly electrostatically charged, of getting these things out. I think that's how they make this base like this, to sort of hold on to them. But the challenge is then once you've when you want to use them and get them out, it's a tricky business. Those have just sort of sprayed over me. Right. So those are the RP tools, hexagonal punch, die punch, and they do a circular one as well. And years ago I did a video on YouTube for them where I went into a lot more detail than that on how they operate. Right, so we get the styrene out of the way and get some of this green stuff out, which I'm going to use. Yeah, styrene rod, it's always worth keeping some of this. I've had some of this for years. I zoom back out again so you can see the sections that you can get. They do. There's another company as well called Evergreen that are well known. 16 degrees, well it's 18 here in West Sussex today, so we are officially hotter than Texas, which is good to know. Yeah, so I have a stack of this which I've used for making various different terrain in the past, and you know, some of the rods I've bought individual sheets of and different sizes and shapes, and they do little circular ones as well. So yeah, very handy to keep hold of. These I've had for years. They're all going a bit yellow at the end, some of these, because I haven't used them on every terrain job that I've done. Get that out of the way. Right, so green stuff. Obviously it's blue and yellow, which turns into green. And I'll just cut a little strip of this off before I start to model it onto the bases. So they come in two parts, and the two parts, as you can see on there that it's not been stored as well as it could have been. That bit's gone a bit dry on the end, but because the two parts are there, you can just cut through them, and that allows you to then just mix those two bits together and stash away the rest. Some people say storing this in a fridge is something that increases the life of the green stuff, stops it drying out. I haven't really found a need for that. I've quite often just stored it in a small box and then I use it up. But I have had it go a little bit firmer over the years if I've kept some for a long time. But I think the idea is to just try and get as much modelling in as you can to use it. So there, as you can see, you start to squish it together and the colours blend together to a green, and then that's why it's called green stuff, which is just 2-part epoxy putty. Companies like Games Workshop have used it for years to allow you to sort of sort out holes and things. The more you mix together, the more of a reaction you get. So it actually dries quicker if you do a larger chunk of this. Now, some people would say, what I've done there with that bit, it hasn't quite blended as good as it could do in some places. There's some firmer pieces, but really, when you're just doing a bit of base work, it's not really worth worrying about. I can see straight away here I've probably not made enough as well, so I sort of start on one. This might only do about 1.5 of these bases, and then I'll do a bit more later on too. So let's pick one. I'll try the Battle Master here. Supposed to get up to 20 later. Oh, that's a bit warmer. We're at the tail end. I mean, it's 7 o'clock here, so it's a little bit cooler now in the evening. I have been in the garden earlier, which is unusual for April in the UK as well. We sometimes get a warm April. I mean, what normally happens with a warm April in the UK is that you get sort of two and a half stunning weeks in April, and then you don't get a summer, and you end up kicking yourself and saying, why didn't I make the most of that brief summer we had back in April? So I think that's probably enough squishing together. So I'll zoom in so we can see the operation up close again. And here we go. Just, if I zoom in to the base, I should be able to see what's going on there. That's great. So, right, how do you get this into the base in a sensible way? Well, it's the classic make little tiny hot dogs of sorts by taking it off and then just rolling it. So little sausages that you can then push in. So I will use at all times a cocktail stick and just get a piece of that off, and then I can see straight away around the edge that there's a lip on that base in there, so I want to fill that in to start with. And just because I'm fussy, I wouldn't want to have it building up on the edge of the hex there. I just want it to sort of cover the main base itself. So it's just a case of slowly and steadily filling in like that. And this model itself was super glued in there. And I could have, when I super glued it in, I could have actually used some of this green stuff at the same time, but I've kept it separate. Yeah, and so initially it's just a case of filling the big holes. I don't want to do the detail yet until I've got the areas around the edge filled in. So I do use different techniques for this. I have various putties that I've used, acrylic mediums and things that have sand and bits and pieces in. They're just as useful for this, but kind of when you've got a larger space around the edges, like on these Battletech bases, I prefer to stick a bit of green stuff down the side to give it a really good firm bond. Plus you can sort of sculpt little bits and pieces into the green stuff as well. When I say sculpt, I mean technically just prod holes to make it look sort of textured. So anyway, with the lockdown, I've been mostly at home, obviously, like everybody else across the world, apart from our various key service people that have been busy still. But I haven't been as focused as I could have been on getting started. You know, when we all went into lockdown, it was you know, a mix of emotions of, well, maybe I'll have all this time now to do all those things that, because I'm not working either, to catch up on my miniature backlog, and one of them was this box set. So yeah, these Battletech models was one of the things that's been on the shelf for ages, and I thought I'll just give that a go, just for a bit of fun to get them all finished. And then I just sort of stalled really and haven't done as much as I thought, and I'm just making the most of having a break and resting. And if you think about it, obviously we've all had vacations and holidays before. Well, thanks Andy Ashton. And yeah, we've all had holidays at home. Some of us are retired obviously already and chilling out pottering around the garden, etc. But I haven't. So I've had, what is it, 30? Something like 32 years of work. 32 years of work or more. And the longest break I've ever had in between work is about a week, where I've decided, you know, take a week off between jobs when I've, you know, you've been hired for a new job, and it just so happens that it's convenient to say I can start on a certain date, and that gives you a small extra break in between jobs, which you're essentially unpaid for, but no harm in taking the occasional break. But I officially finished work with the company I was with last week, so this really is my first week of total freedom. And it'll be interesting to see how it pans out, because it's certainly not an easy time to find another job. But at the same time, maybe some enforced downtime, even though, I mean, I can't afford it, but what can you do about it? It's out of your control, isn't it? So some enforced downtime where I'm not earning and doing more hobbies. Maybe my body needs it. 30 years of never having any downtime. You know, everybody takes holidays, don't they? And we take our sort of 1 week or 2 week breaks. 2 weeks are even rarer these days. I say, when I started my career 30 years ago, taking a 2 week holiday was never frowned on. But now most people just take a week, don't they? Or even long weekends. So you see what I'm doing there is I'm just using the cocktail stick to just sort of roll on the green stuff to flatten it out. Just making sure I'm sort of going up against the feet. So the other putties you can use are milliput, is just as good for this really. In many ways milliput can be better for large gap filling like this, and it does set harder than green stuff. Green stuff has a sort of flexibility, at least that's all it has for me. So yeah, when I said this was only going to be enough about 1.5, I'm probably about right really, and I think I should have made a bit less than this chunk. Time to retire. Yes, good idea, Andy. Just if only I had some money to pay the mortgage and things like that, that would be great. So yeah, it's nearly all covered up. So what I'm going to do, because this hardens, rather than go and start filling on the second model, I'll just finish this one. And that way I won't end up with a really large chunk of nearly dry stuff on the model. I'll be able to finish doing any of the detailing on there. See, those sort of bits there annoy me. It's just a sort of gap that needs to be filled under the foot, but you know, so just take a bit of this stuff off and squish it in. Yeah, so if you're going to be buying this green stuff, this two-part, as I was showing earlier, the two-part green stuff, which is blue and yellow, turns green. Oh, thanks for the comment, Bill. Yes, I'm glad you like the oil pin washing on the stone rhino. That was another moment of mine where I just suddenly had that stone rhino on my shelf for actually more than 10 years. That stone rhino was on my shelf, actually put together on its base, and it had been taunting me on the shelf, and I finally said, okay, I put that thing together, about time now that I painted it, so that's what I did. So there's more space underneath that foot, but no one's going to actually see that really. But I will put a tiny little strip in there. Just flatten that piece out into a tiny sausage. Picks it up, sandwiches it in there. Again, by sort of rolling the cocktail stick around, it flattens it into the gap. So the very easiest way to sort of texture on to green stuff is to just prod initially to give it that kind of look of a textured earth section. But if you were detailing it up, it's a bit of a clumsy, you know, it looks like fur or something, doesn't it, if you were just doing that only on there. Possibly also the wrong sort of scale. You know, that's the same kind of texturing I might do if I was doing a bit of earth on a 28mm model as well. But this is where, if I'm using these other shapes for bits of masonry and things that are on there, I start to take these out that I cut out earlier and drop them on. Again, you can sort of push them in and then build up over the top of them. You could super glue them on afterwards, but then it's not going to look as integrated into the base. And then you get just, if you have a look at that close up, just looks like a bit of masonry on there. And you can also see where I've been working around the edges with the cocktail stick prodding holes in there too. So I put up a few more bits like this of the cut up styrene rod onto there. Again, just pushing it down into the putty. I can already feel the putty's now, you know, it's beginning to harden anyway. So I sort of pre-made a slot for that which I've now missed, just to give me a bit of extra debris going up in another direction on there. It's a bit forensic. So you can still push this stuff about quite a lot to cover up. And on the final result of that, I would I'll be putting on some paint that will highlight that out as a kind of either a piece of rusting masonry or something that's tucked in there. And so get some more bits. And depending on what you were going for, you could go for something that's more of a road section with some flatter earth around the edge of a road or something to detail up, rather than it just being sort of random concrete or masonry that's tucked around in there. You know, the sort of debris of war that this is. If anything, I could put some very small bits of gravel and things on there as well, which could be embedded as like little rocks. You see, I just thought it might be useful to you to see something that's sort of finished that uses this kind of style. Let me just dig in here. So these are 15mm scale models, Ground Zero Games. And they're very much more flatter style of a base, and I've put sort of normal sands and things on there. But when you sort of put on some very tiny bits of styrene rod, if you paint them up in a different colour like that, they can look like sort of debris on there. Okay, Bill, thanks for sharing it to the yeah, that's great, to the live or to the main Battletech page. That's handy. Yeah, say, just showing you there that bits of this debris, when you put them on, if you paint them in a slightly different colour to your base texture, they're going to look of interest on there. And I just realised I needed some gravel to go on too, so I'm going to now just dig for some gravel in the room. Coming back from the other side of the room, so I have here a couple of different grades of gravel that I use. If I move the model out of the way, I just keep them in these tubs. That's a slightly larger size, maybe a bit too big for the Battletech scale, and there's some finer grade that I've got. I've also found some other bits of plastic card. These ones I've been using on 15mm scale, but I've basically cut up this plastic card into tiny sections, and by doing that, chipping the edges like that, it gives it that kind of ruined concrete look that might be snapped up. Again, that would probably be okay on a Battletech base as well, but yeah, I have a little tub of that kind of debris that I've used before. Not all the pieces have I had a hack at, but when you do hack at them, you can get that kind of edge with a little scalpel along it. It's not like the best of views there of it, but yeah, you can see that's got some edging that I've cut onto it. Get my chair back. Yeah, so bits and pieces of stuff there. Now I'm going to get my tweezers and just find some relevant stones that are about the right size to go on there as well. Just sort of try them out. So here's a little guy. I'll take a few bits of gravel off that I can use. Just rest them on there for now, but I'll embed them in. It's a larger stone. I'll make myself some room without tossing this gravel all over the place. Headphones back on. Now I can hear myself. So again, zooming in on that so we can see what's going on. So I've done nothing there but just rest these bits on, but if I again move them around a bit to find myself a good position for them, just embeds them into the green stuff a bit to break up again that very nearly even look that you get with the green stuff by putting a kind of sharper edge in there. And again, if I use a slightly contrasting colour to paint those when you're finishing the basing, it does mean that they look a little bit more natural. I lost that piece there. Got that green stuff getting in my way there. Yeah, I can feel it very much setting off now, the two-part putty. I mean, there's many different ways to do this. This is just one way I'm doing it at the moment. One other option is that you just use some green stuff really to set the base and fix the model in there, and then fill the bigger holes. And then you could use any type of sand or grit on top to cover it. You certainly don't need to do what I've done here, which is like add the texture to the green stuff itself. And like I said before, it's not necessarily perfectly in scale with something that's this 6mm 1/300th scale size. When you have the green stuff like this and you're putting holes in it, it looks more like something that would work for maybe 28mm. But having done this a few times before, I'm quite happy with the result, really. So just repeating my normal process. So yeah, I've embedded a few boulders on there now in the green stuff while it's setting. Put some of that debris on there as well that's going to look like bits of masonry, and it's just great to have that sharp edge as well to be able to paint that up as a kind of a rusting piece of masonry or broken bit of concrete. And then the same goes on the back there. So what I was thinking of doing is using one of these pieces, which is one of the ones I mentioned before, which has had its sort of edge scraped to give it a broken concrete look. But it's possibly a bit too big. Yeah, so just using a scalpel to cut it down to size. And again, just use the scalpel to give it that broken, old, worn out, destroyed concrete look. So I could probably squeeze that piece in behind the foot. And then just push around some green stuff to cover it up on one edge. I mean, depending how wild you were with this, you could actually make it look like, if it was softer ground, you could make it look like the mecha's sort of slightly squashed its way into sort of the earth due to the heavy weight coming down. You know, I just want to roll a tiny bit of extra green stuff, just break it off this piece that's here and just use that on the back. So I've just got a tiny nub of green stuff and put that behind that section there. Just again to make it look like the broken up concrete piece I've put in there is somehow slightly embedded in the earth, in the whatever the destruction has been in this war zone. So if I take a picture of that whilst on here, that should freeze frame this momentarily. And then if I zoom in again, you'll see up close. It's very bright white, so you can't really see the scratching on the sides of it. I've done that kind of slightly odd boulder there too. A couple of those bits of gravel on the front that will paint up in a slightly contrasting colour to the base when it's done as well. And yeah, just lots of prodding with the cocktail stick. Yeah, certainly, you know, these models are old school, and that technique is quite sort of old school technique as well. Look at that, I've stuck to a piece of green stuff there. So yeah, with any of these bits then of spare styrene, plastic, I just keep all that for any other jobs in the future as well. And as I work through these other bases, I'll do a similar technique as well. And that will take, you know, it takes a couple of days to cure properly, but you could actually airbrush that or prime it today in a few hours, because it will still dry off underneath a bit of primer. So yeah, that's one done. So I'm not going to go through all the others, but that's just showing you the technique I've used on there. What else could I do? Well, I could show you how I might make a small bush, which can also work out if you've got a sort of raised bush things on there. So again, that would just be squishing a tiny round piece of green stuff. It's possibly a bit too much. Yeah, squish together a little tiny round bit. So grab that off there with the cocktail stick, and then go in the center somewhere like here. It's not going to be a highly technical bush, but once it's blended in a bit and some holes are pushed in there, you can get away with what looks like a raised area of earth or a bush. You know, at this scale you wouldn't see the defined, you know, 6mm scale, so you wouldn't see the defined edges of a bush anyway. It would just be a bit of shrubbery down on the base. But if it's painted up in a slightly different colour once it's done, or even just used as another sort of raised area of soil that's on the ground. So it mostly involves just lots of prodding. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that lots of other techniques you could use. You could just put the green stuff in to fill the gaps, as I said, and then use sand with PVA over the top just to give it a gravel texture. Or if you enjoy just sitting there and prodding away like I've done with the green stuff, it's good fun. You can see my slightly bushy looking lump in the middle there. One thing with the bush is to sort of try and go in under the edge so it does look like it's some of its roots have lifted the base up a bit, so you've not just got like a round bump, you've got something that looks separate, like a tiny bush of some kind. Oh, thanks for the comment, Sean, that's appreciated. So there you go, various different ideas, little rocks pushed into the green stuff, small bits of this debris, and you could go to town on this debris. You could have longer sheets of that in there. And as I mentioned before, if you carve at them a bit, they can start to look like broken up bits of concrete. And I've seen people do this where they have several of these with gaps in between, and they can look great. But yep, that's it. What time have I got? It's 20 to 8. So I'm going to switch back to me with that one. Great, so thanks very much for listening in. This has been a brief, how many hours have I done this for? I don't know, like probably about 40 minutes or so. But yes, appreciated that you're viewing it, and while I'm in isolation here, I'm going to get on with the rest of these miniatures. Here it is for